We just want to have fun this season. So we're going to lean into the best kind of Survivor fun, the dangerous kind.
Okay, but like, what's the second most dangerous season of Survivor? It may surprise you to hear, but stranding a bunch of strangers on a deserted island for a month can be quite an unsafe activity. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Weather, disease, creepy crawlies, freak accidents, players lying about being on medication. There's no way to know what will happen. So today I'm doing a history of Survivor seasons and talking about which locations were the most dangerous, and what it was that made these seasons so challenging for castaways and sometimes even production alike. I feel like I should emphasize this is not saying we should go back to this level of danger, I just think it's fun to look back at Survivor history. Let's get into it. I think a good place to start is the beginning, Survivor Borneo. I didn't start watching Survivor until South Pacific. I was sadly too busy being an infant at the time of Borneo's premiere. It's one of my deepest character flaws and I will continue to work to rectify it. But from what I've been told by the dinosaurs who can remember the year 2000, no one quite knew what Survivor was going to be. Were they going to kill a non-zero number of Americans on the island? Would they starve to death? Would they go full Lord of the Flies? The general public really did not know what Survivor would be. Funnily enough, production didn't actually know either. If you've ever read Mark Burnett's book, which is simultaneously one of the most interesting and one of the most self-obsessed books I've ever read, you know that they were really just making it up as they went along, and it definitely shows. But after a record-breaking first season, Survivor realized that if they were going to top it, they needed to go bigger, better, and more dangerous. They accomplished this in Survivor the Australian Outback. The game was longer, the conditions were harsher, they pushed some guy into a fire. Okay, maybe they didn't do that last part, but the 42-day season, combined with the fact that watching early Survivor awards just kind of makes me laugh,
6 French fries and a big old dish of ranch dressing to dip it in.
meant that this season was far tougher than the first. So tough that one castaway actually did almost die, Elizabeth. Apparently she had a type of celiac disease but wasn't aware of it. This means that on top of starving, she couldn't get any sort of nutrients from the food they gave her. Her hair was falling out, production had to take her to get an IV drip in the later stages of the game so they could avoid pulling her. I know Roger was trying to do a nice thing by asking to be voted out earlier so Elizabeth could get a bit more money, but you know what she was going through? Maybe it was secretly evil of him. Watching the endgame of the Australian Outback is hard because the castaways were just suffering by then. It was a dire season, and it was kind of exactly what Survivor wanted. This, combined with the scoop and fire accident, really emphasized how real the game of Survivor was. But you know what they said next season? They said, let's go bigger. Let's go even deadlier. And they did with Survivor Africa. This season was even more dangerous than the last. The castaways had to deal with a water supply contaminated by elephant dung. The food was so disgusting that Big Tom opted to lose 80 pounds instead of eating it, transforming him into Medium Tom. There were wild animals that got so close to camp the castaways had to make sure it was properly barricaded. And Mark Burnett came and yelled at them at one point for not doing so. Soldiers with guns patrolled the camp to ensure that no one got mauled by lions. Having a fire at night was mandatory. And the castaways suffered too. Lindsay ended up on an IV drip and she didn't even make the merge. Lex ended up extremely sick by the end of it, apparently in the early stages of kidney failure at one point, peeing blood. I am shocked no one got pulled this season. Maybe I'm a wimp, but if I were on production and someone ended up having kidney failure, I probably wouldn't slap them on the back, tell them to rehydrate and say, go get 'em, gamer. Survivor Africa was as dangerous as Survivor gets. And you know what? They even tried to top it the very next season. That's right, they saw all of this happening in Africa and went, we can do better. That brings us to Season 4, Survivor Jordan. Wait, what? Due to unforeseen circumstances that occurred around September of 2001, they opted not to fly 16 Americans to Jordan to film a season of Survivor. That's fine, Survivor Marquesas takes us to Jeff's least favourite location ever, because the sandflies ate them, constantly. There was no escaping the no-nos. Ever wonder why Jeff seems to hate this season? It's mainly because of the sandflies. Aside from the sandflies, this season was relatively safe for the castaways, but relatively unsafe if you were a local who didn't want their house to be torn down. After this, Survivor seemed to calm down on trying to constantly one-up itself on the danger front. I hope we can all agree that is a relatively good thing. It is a miracle no one died in Africa. If Survivor kept trying to put people in more and more dangerous situations, we would probably have no Survivor by now. That's not to say Survivor got easy. Thailand was a brutally hot location with a long journey to the water supply, Amazon had piranhas, and Pearl Islands was so rough we saw our very first quit. Classic Austin, the man afraid of pelicans, the man who sold all his clothes on day one in an attempt to get supplies for his tribe, before learning that selling all your clothes makes you extremely susceptible to staph infections and means you'll probably get medevaced very soon regardless, so you might as well ask to be voted out, but then the host forces you to quit to make an example of you. What a wimp. Then Survivor All-Stars decided not to give the castaways any way to start a fire at the beginning, meaning they couldn't boil water, meaning they couldn't, drink the water. Watching them desperately suck water off the leaves is just something that left an impression on my brain as a kid. Survivor Vanuatu featured a massive earthquake, and the final immunity challenge of Survivor Palau ended with both Ian and Tom suffering permanent nerve damage in their feet. None of these seasons quite touch on what I mean when I say dangerous. For that we need to go to Guatemala. How about we start the season with an 11-mile hike through the jungle, during which a spined tree will fall on Blake and try to kill him, and Bobby John suffers from dehydration. But hey, they did win a slightly better camp. But the perils of Guatemala didn't stop there. It was hot. So hot, and they could not go in the water, because if they went into the water there was a very real risk of being eaten.
Hope you guys all get bit by a freaking crocodile. Scumbags.
Judd poisoned some castaways at one point. They were basically living in a cloud of mosquitoes at all times. Look at Lydia's back, that's messed up. The Mayan gods tried to kill them near the end. I'd probably still say Africa was the most difficult season, but this one was no joke. I think Guatemala also caused Survivor to rein their ambition in again, because the next few seasons were not as dangerous as this, thank God. They did try to do a race war at one point, but that's not the kind of danger I'm after here. Survivor Fiji may win the contest for the least dangerous season, that is if you're on the Haves tribe. If you're on the Have-Nots tribe, you were suffering non-stop. If you're on the Haves tribe, you got all the luxuries of life, including a coffee press that exposes people's biases.
You have to boil water, you put the coffee in the bottom, you pour the boiling water on top, and you let it sit for about 3 minutes, and then you press it down, and then you have coffee. Simple as that.
Survivor Gabon had a bit of a return to form when it came to danger. It was in the same continent as Survivor Africa after all. Beautiful wildlife and a lake you couldn't really get clean in because of all of the leeches. But still, nothing extreme would happen for a while. There were freak incidents in Samoa with Russell, the rain in Nicaragua was brutal, causing 2 quits, South Pacific had a challenge that caused Dawn to have 3 crushed vertebrae, Courtney couldn't listen to producer instructions that may or may not have been edited in after the fact.
This is a very high fall. Make sure you keep your arms to your chest and land on your back.
Colden had Schrodinger's appendix, but again, none of these moments were quite the level of danger I'm looking for. That wouldn't happen until back-to-back seasons so marred by issues that they caused production to finally put their foot down and plant themselves permanently in the relatively safe and controlled Fiji, assuming we ignore the fact this was actually done for massive tax breaks, but shh, don't worry about it. Survivor Cambodia and Survivor Kaoh Rong. Even though it was actually filmed second, I'll start with Cambodia. I can probably sum it up in a couple of images. This is Spence Spot at the beginning of Survivor Cambodia. This is Spence Spot at the end of Survivor Cambodia. Now, it may take a more eagle-eyed view of this spot, but he's actually just dying. Cambodia was rough. The heat was a killer. It was hot enough for Joe to pass out during a challenge, and Keith was actually not that far behind. I would talk more about Survivor Cambodia, but Survivor Kaoh Rong was even worse. The only reason we didn't suffer a ton of medevacs in Cambodia is because of how brutal Kaoh Rong was and how cautious production was of the location as a result, especially of any potential infections. For example, Liz, despite being in the game for 8 days, ended up with multiple staph infections that needed to be cut out and required plastic surgery to mitigate the scarring. Peter was flown back to the US to have surgery on his hands and back due to infection. We all saw the state of Aubrey, Scott, Ty, and Neil during the check-ins. None of those were pretty, with Neil needing to be evacuated. Joe ate so much beef he couldn't use the bathroom, that must have been rough. And then there's the worst planned challenge in Survivor history. In episode 4, they held a reward challenge, and as always the Dream Team tested it first, because that's their job. In the initial run of this challenge, there were markers indicating where the castaways should dig, but someone, I genuinely don't know who, decided that made the challenge too quick and easy. The markers were removed, and the castaways were digging in the hot sand for ages. 45 degrees Celsius, that's 114 Fahrenheit. And what do you know? Heat stroke for 3 different castaways. Over salt and pepper. After this, Survivor planted itself in Fiji permanently, and nothing really quite reached that level of danger again, which I am thankful for, I am anti-people dying on Survivor as a general rule of thumb. There were cyclones in Millennials vs Gen X and David vs Goliath, but the castaways were evacuated during these. And while the monster did make an appearance in the beginning of the new era, I don't think it managed to eat any of the castaways. And with how hungry they try to make the castaways in the new era, I'd be more afraid for the monster. So, what was the most dangerous season of Survivor? I'd probably rank it as Guatemala 3rd, Kaoh 2nd, and Africa 1st. But what do you think? Do you miss the literal danger the castaways used to be in? Do you not really care? Let me know. Until next time, I've been Henry Hickman Survivor, and I'll see you at that elephant dung infested watering hole.